God of truth, help us to keep your law of love and to walk in ways of wisdom, that we may find true life in Jesus Christ, your Son. Amen. I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. So speaks God at the end of our Old Testament reading from Hosea today. And sacrifice is a theme which links three of our readings: Hosea, Psalm 50, and of course the first part of the Gospel passage. When did you last make that sort of sacrifice? It's not really something we do these days, unless perhaps you count a contribution to the local food bank. But the law of Moses and the history of the people who followed it are full of animals, bulls and sheep in particular, being ritually sacrificed as burnt offerings to the Lord. Abraham was even instructed to sacrifice Isaac, his only son, until a ram conveniently appeared on the scene to take his place. But animal sacrifices were not trivial acts. I did some searching online. These days you can expect about £5 a kilo live weight for beef cattle, and a bull can weigh up to 1,000 kilos. So one bull as a burnt offering would have cost its owner the equivalent of £5,000 in today's money. As I say, not a trivial cost. The first mention of anyone sacrificing animals to God is in Genesis chapter 15, to seal the covenant between God and Abraham, that Abraham would become the progenitor of a nation as numerous as the stars visible in the sky. Abraham divides the carcasses of the animals in two, and during the night a firepot and a flaming torch pass between the halves. And so the covenant is forged. And no doubt in recognition of this founding event, hardly any ritual prescribed in the law of Moses is without its sacrifice. And yet, says Hosea, God does not desire it. I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. And in Psalm 50 we find the same thing. Do you think I eat the flesh of bulls or drink the blood of goats? Offer to God a sacrifice of thanksgiving and fulfill your vows to God Most High. And again, Jesus quotes Hosea as he responds to the Pharisees. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners. Maybe it's not such a bad thing that we no longer feel we must make burnt offerings to our God. But there is still a cost. Not in money, but in how we act. Steadfast love, knowledge of God, thanksgiving, fulfillment of vows, mercy. They may not carry a financial cost, but one of time, effort, and commitment, of devotion to God and our fellow humans. A very different form of sacrifice, summed up by Jesus elsewhere. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbour as yourself. And as we saw in Jesus, keeping those commandments can cost us everything we have. And that might be a good place for me to stop. Except that our gospel passage does not end there. It's a story of interruptions. The celebration of the calling of Matthew, having already been interrupted by the Pharisees, is then gate-crashed by disciples of John the Baptist, wanting to know what Jesus thinks he's doing. But his reply to them is in turn interrupted by the arrival of the leader of the synagogue, desperate that Jesus should come to his mortally sick daughter. And finally, his journey to her is interrupted by the woman touching the fringe of his cloak. Inexplicably, at first sight at least, the lectionary skips over the arrival of John's disciples, but it does include the two healings. So clearly somebody thinks that that last bit is relevant. That story of the two healings appears in all three of the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark and Luke. Now we're fairly sure that Mark came first, and that Matthew and Luke based their accounts on Mark's basic narrative. Often they embellish it, but occasionally they omit some detail which Mark includes. Matthew tells us that the woman has suffered hemorrhages for 12 years. In biblical thinking, the number 12 has ritual significance. It signifies completeness and perfection. What Matthew, for some reason, omits is that the girl whom Jesus heals is 12 years old. The woman's sickness exactly spans her life to that point. It's reasonable to assume that the woman's hemorrhages stop at exactly the moment when the girl reaches puberty, when her periods begin and she in her turn becomes fertile. Rosalind Brown, whose commentary I consulted, suggests that the coincidence of these two events and the symbolic number 12 should be seen as looking forward symbolically to the coming of God's kingdom, when all creation is healed and perfected at the end of time. And in both cases, Jesus is asked to make himself ritually unclean, either by touching a woman who is menstruating or by touching a dead body. Both requests would have outraged the society of his day. And in responding to them, Jesus is making his own sacrifice of mercy and of steadfast love. And in that act, Jesus is bringing heaven and earth together as one. He has come to a world that is unclean, and through his sacrifice of himself, he has healed all humanity, prefiguring his final greatest act of love at Calvary. In our passage from Hosea, God asks, "What shall I do with you, O Ephraim? What shall I do with you, O Judah? Your love is like a morning cloud, like dew that goes away early." God's answer to his own question is to demonstrate his love through Jesus Christ. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that everyone who believes in him may not perish, but have everlasting life. Amen.